Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to episode 22 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes, and with me is my partner in all things therapeutic, Mr. Ken Kelly. How are you today, Ken?
Not bad at all. It's good to be here, Rory. Nice to be back in the seat doing the podcast. Really well received. Last week, over 1,000 downloads on the day that the Counselling Tutor Podcast went live. We're just so very grateful to you guys for supporting us through this. You know, when you say, and with me today, my partner, I always think you're going to say partner in crime one day, Rory. I don't know why it is.
Crimes against poor mental health, guilty as charged, Ken.
Right, so we have got another absolutely cracking, as we say here in the northwest of England, it means very good, episode for you lined up today. We're going to be kicking off, and Rory and I are going to be debating client confidentiality, and that's an interesting one there. So we're going to be speaking about that in Theory with Rory. Rory is going to be looking at the actualising tendency. So big words there, and I guess it's quite a big piece of theory and philosophy, I guess, that sits behind that. In Person-Centered Business today, I'm going to be speaking about the introductory session, or maybe a free session that you may choose to offer as a counsellor or a psychotherapy, where a client comes in and gets maybe a taster of what counselling with you is about, the pros and cons of that and how to set that up. And then we're going to be closing today with looking at research. Now, we did cover research. We looked at qualitative and quantitative research in episode 18, but this is a different angle on research, Rory, isn't it? We're going to be kind of looking a bit deeper.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at why research is important. One of the things that I always talk about when I used to teach is that, and talk about now, is that our practice never, ever stops. You know, as professionals, we're asked for continuing professional development. So we're going to be talking about what research is, from massive research projects, maybe down to just doing your own research and finding out about a particular client presentation.
Love it, and looking forward to getting onto that topic. So we kick off with confidentiality for clients, and it's kind of the cornerstone of what we offer. I guess from my perspective, a client needs to feel safe. They need to feel that the information that they're bringing across is going to be held in confidence. Else, I guess that they wouldn't be able to trust within the relationship and bring that information. But it's not just white and black, is it, Rory?
No, it's not. It's not as kind of polarized as that. In the UK, so we're only speaking for the UK at the moment, because I know we're listened to in lots of different countries, and in lots of different countries you'll have different laws. But in the UK, confidentiality extends to the client being able to access your notes. So if you're thinking of note taking, the client can access your notes under the Data Protection Act. And I think in contracting, you really should be telling your client they can access their own notes. I think that's really ethical. I think it's ethical that you tell them you're taking notes, because that is now a BACP requirement, or keeping records. And also you tell the client you're keeping records. But who can access them? And this is an interesting one, isn't it? And it's come up in our Facebook page. So if you don't know what our Facebook page is, if you go to www.counsellingtutor.com, 2 L's in counselling, click on our Facebook page. It's a closed group, so you have to knock on the door to get in. We let you in. And people were talking in that group about what constitutes confidentiality, who can access records. So in terms of who can access records, the client obviously can access their own records under the Data Protection Act of 1998. A coroner can have access to the records. So if a client were to die, a coroner can request records and anything else they want. And here's the thing, they've got incredible powers, the coroner, because they're a legal entity. And also a court with a court order. So it might be that a court can access your records. Now, there's a big debate about what constitutes notes. So here we go. A lot of people think that notes are just something that you write down and you store. And that's pretty much true. You write down the themes of the session so that you can have an aid to memory, particularly useful if you've got a big client load. However, some person-centered therapists keep what they call process notes. The process notes are their own journal. They're like it's like a reflection of their practice, and it doesn't have to be accurate. The process notes don't have to be accurate. You can have all sorts of fantasies about where the client's going. And when I use the word fantasy, what I'm thinking is you can use conjecture. You can think, I wonder if the client's thinking this or he's behaving this way, because in your clinical notes, you've got to just put the facts. The facts. You can't kind of embellish them or give your opinion on them, because if they're called to a court, they're just interested only in the facts, not your opinion. But here's the thing. A lot of therapists think that their process notes can't be sequestered, should I say, by a court. They can. The court, with a court order, can get the socks off your feet.
Yeah.
If they want. So, if you're asked for notes, what usually happens is, as has happened to me on a few occasions, the police have got in contact with me. Can you send your notes? And I say, we're always polite and professional with our colleagues in the police. And I always say, well, if any of my clients want their notes released, they can actually, they know where I am. They can write to me, give me permission to release them. It'll have to be written permission. Alternatively, if they won't, then it's a court order. And the police say, thank you very much, because they know that. They know that I know that. So they go away. And in the two occasions I've had my notes requested by the police, the client has sent a permission to disclose, so I keep it in my records. But however, I discovered something very interesting. If you work for our National Health Service, the client, if a client dies, apparently the relatives for a fee, or the executor of the will for a fee, can get hold of the medical records, which includes client notes. Right. Now, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's really, really tricky. And you were mentioning the coroner, Rory, and I have had occasion to deal with the coroner's court, and the investigator from the coroner's court said, and I quote, as he sat in the chair in my counselling room, said, we have the power to come boot down your door and take everything in your office. And that is an immense power. And I'm just mindful that if you're listening to this, we're going to be looking at more about confidentiality, but if you're looking more at note-taking, please go and listen to episode number 11 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, where Rory and I cover note-taking in some depth there. But I hear what you're saying, and I didn't know that the executor could claim the notes or the medical records.
Yeah, in the NHS, which leads me to the other thing. If you're working for an agency, technically speaking, every piece of work you do for that agency belongs to them. So I think it's very well worth, if you're working for an agency, and particularly if you store your notes on their premises, which I know that some agencies want you to do, have a word about what their policy is on disclosure, because I think that's really important. I think it's really important to get a real handle on exactly what can happen. But yeah, so that's the thing regarding documentation, who can access your notes, court order, coroner, the client, and if it's National Health Service, apparently anyone who is the executor of the estate can access the medical records as well. And they would come under medical records. It's a bit of a minefield, really, isn't it?
It is, and I think it's also worth noting that if you are working in an agency, and if your agency is doing inter-agency working and it has inter-agency partnerships, it's worth checking those policies, because I know I've certainly worked in agencies where it was common to share client files and client information and client notes between varying organizations. And in some cases, that's really beneficial for the client because they're not having to repeat their story and their material again and again and again. But it's about you having an understanding of what that mechanism is and how that actually works. And client confidentiality can bite you as well. Keep in mind when you're doing your contracting with your client, that is where you're outlining what the boundaries are in that confidentiality. Don't forget to mention that you take stuff to supervision. Your client has a right to know that you will be taking material from your session with them to your supervisor. So make sure that you mention that within your contracting and let them know. In mine, I say, there are elements of my practice that I will take to my supervisor. I tell them who my supervisor is, and then I say, we're not really looking at what material you're bringing. We're really looking at how I'm dealing with that material, and I won't be mentioning your name. I might say the client presented like this and we're working with it like this, and I put their mind at ease because it is their heavy material, their private stuff that they're bringing and sharing, and they need to know who has access to that. If you're a student and you're going to be using a client's material in a case study, they need to know that's their private information. So confidentiality can be a sneaky one that can kind of come around a corner and blindside you without you actually seeing it. And even if you're doing a recorded session with a peer for submission for your assignment, contract with them on the fact that is going to be going and maybe listened to by an external moderator, and maybe check with them at the end of the recording that they still feel happy for that information to go out. It's a cornerstone of what we do, confidentiality, and we've got to preserve it, I guess, but we've also got to work within the law and the regulations of the agencies that we're practicing.
Absolutely, and it all comes down to the contract. As long as it's clear in the contract, right at the outset of therapy or working with the clients, what the limits are, who can access what, how long you store your notes, that's the other thing, then you're covered. It's only when maybe your notes are asked for, the client doesn't know, that can become a bit of a problem.
Indeed. So there you go. Have a think about that. Have a chat with your peers. Certainly, if you're in placement, have a look at the policies within your agencies. So moving on to theory with Rory, which I always love and enjoy. And I guess building on Maslow's hierarchy of needs that you spoke about recently in a podcast, Rory, you're going to be speaking about the actualising tendency. Am I right that was a theory from Maslow?
Well, we're gonna kind of tease that out in this broadcast, because Maslow and Rogers had a slightly different view of it, and a lot of people think that all humanistic thinkers think the same, and it's not quite true. So we're going to be looking at what Rogers meant by the actualising tendency, and actually he developed a thought on biology as well on the actualising tendency. He even talked about DNA. Can you believe that? So we're going to be looking at that and talk about what Rogers actually meant.
You see, Rory, this is why I love theory with Rory, because I've been in practice for many years now and I still learn stuff. Let's go right in to theory with Rory.
Counselling Theory with Rory Lees Oakes.
Mention the term the actualising tendency to a group of counsellors, and almost all will attribute the idea to either Carl Rogers or Abraham Maslow. So it may come as a bit of a surprise that the term was first coined in a book published in 1934 entitled The Organism, written by Kurt Goldstein, a German neurologist and psychiatrist who created an holistic theory of the organism and was influential in the development of the Gestalt approach in psychotherapy. Goldstein describes self-actualization as a driving life force that will ultimately lead to maximising one's ability and determine the path of one's life. While Goldstein's ideas were revolutionary and a departure from the more medicalised view of human motivation, they failed to gain any traction in intellectual and medical circles until almost a decade later, when, in 1943, Brooklyn-born psychologist Abraham Maslow published an article in a periodical called the Psychological Review. Maslow's article, entitled A Theory of Human Motivation, formed the basis of what was later to become known as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Interesting, Maslow departed from Goldstein's ideas of the actualising tendency being a driving force, replacing it with a human desire to be the best one can be. This subtle difference is, is that Maslow's model, the actualising tendency, could only be fully realised if certain conditions were fulfilled. At the very bottom of the pyramid, we find physiological needs, then safety needs, love and belonging needs, esteem needs, and finally the need for self-actualisation at the very top. Even then, Abraham Maslow believed that only 1% of the population gained self-actualisation. In 1959, psychologist Carl Rogers outlined his ideas of the actualising tendency in a publication entitled A Theory of Therapy, Personality and Interpersonal Relationships as Developed in the Client-Centered Framework. Like Maslow, Rogers shared similar values on human nature, being basically good and seeing people in a positive way. They also shared the idea that individuals had an innate capacity for personal and emotional growth. However, where they departed was that Maslow believed that the actualising tendency was self-driven and autonomous, almost like an automatic process. Rogers, on the other hand, put great emphasis on the emotional environment that an individual finds himself in and the contribution from others of empathy, genuineness and acceptance. In other words, we need others to help nurture, grow and support our emotional development. Rogers highlighted the seeds of his ideas on the actualising tendency in his final book, A Way of Being, published 7 years before his death in 1987. In it, he recounts a childhood observation from his time living on the farm at Oak Park, Illinois. He writes, "I remember that in my boyhood, the bin which we stored our winter's supply of potatoes was in the basement, several feet below a small window. The conditions were unfavourable, but the potatoes would begin to sprout, pale, white sprouts, so unlike the healthy green shoots they sent up when planted in the soil in the spring. But these sad, spindly sprouts would grow 2 or 3 feet in length as they reached towards the distant light of the window. The sprouts, in their bizarre, futile growth, a sort of desperate expression of the directional tendency I have been describing. They would never become plants, never mature, and never fulfill their real potential. But under the most adverse of circumstances, they were striving to become life. They would not give up, even if they could, not flourish. In dealing with the clients whose lives have been terribly warped, in working with men and women on the back wards of state hospitals, I often think of those potato sprouts. So unfavourable have the conditions in which these people have been developed that their lives often seem abnormal, twisted, scarcely human, yet the directional tendency in them can be trusted. The clue to understanding their behaviour is that they are striving in the only ways that they perceive are available to them to move forward towards growth, towards becoming. To healthy persons, the results may seem bizarre and futile, but they are life's desperate attempt to become itself. So the next time you see a weed pushing from a crack in the wall or a flower growing, consider that according to many theories of the actualising tendency, that like humans, they share one innate drive to be the very best they can be, given the circumstances they find themselves in. And I will make Roger's potato story available as a handout. So if you go across to www.counsellingtutor.com, 2 L's, and look up this episode, you'll be able to find the handout which gives the quote and a reference.
Thank you, Rory. I just learn something every time I listen to Theory with Rory, and I'm a big fan of Actualising Tendency, and I didn't know it had so many different flavours as you would. It's really interesting. Thank you for that.
Yeah, it is really interesting. So we're going straight on to person-centred business with Ken. So what have you got for us today, Ken?
Well, today I want to speak about, so if you are in private practice or thinking of going into private practice, that very first session, are you maybe considering offering some free time for the client to feel if it's a fit for them? And if you are going to offer an introductory session, a taster session, what does that look like? What do we need to think about and take into consideration if we're offering that one-off free session? So we're going to be covering that in Person-Centered Business.
Person-Centered Business with Kenneth Kelly.
Today I wanted to delve into the free initial session or the taster session, the introductory session, that first contact with a brand new client who is looking to come into service. So if you're working in an agency providing a counselling service, it's unlikely that you will have the opportunity to offer this free introductory session unless it is the policy of the agency to have an introductory session. But certainly if you are in private practice, it works really well. So why does it work so well? Firstly, it gives the client a no obligation chance to come in and feel if they can work with you. I think it's so important, and I often say to clients that get in contact with me that the most important thing in counselling is that you, the client, feel comfortable with the counsellor that you're working with, because with that comfort is going to come that connection, is going to come the rapport, and is going to build the trust within the counselling relationship, which is so necessary if the client is to share their struggles, their deepest and darkest parts of their lives that they maybe have never shared with another human being before. So them feeling that they can work with you is so very important. But similarly, you feeling that you can work with the client is just as important. Gives you an opportunity to meet with the client and get an idea of what it is that they're looking to bring to counselling and what they're looking to get out of counselling. And that gives you the opportunity to see if this client's presenting issues matches with your skill set, if you feel that you are the correct modality to work with what the client is presenting with. And of course, there is the personality side of that as well. Is this client bringing anything up for you? We speak a lot about transference and counter-transference. Is this client bringing anything up with you that you would need to examine? So it gives you that opportunity to meet. I think it's really respectful. It's also, I guess, a risk-free place for the client to be. So the way that I run mine is it's once the client has got in contact and they've said, yeah, I'm looking to make contact with you. We've already covered what we might reply in an email. But if they show intention of wanting to come and engage in a session, I will say, well, I gladly offer an introductory session. There is no fee for this introductory session. It's an opportunity for you to feel if you feel comfortable and check out what it is that you want to bring to counselling. We can examine that together. And if after that you choose to engage, you can go away, have a think about that, and let me know. So I guess the other thing is about managing expectations. If somebody is coming in and they have unreasonable expectations, that's another thing that would maybe be flagged up in that first introductory session. And there's less pressure on you as the counsellor because the client isn't paying. So I think it's really beneficial for both you, the counsellor, and for the client. I think it's really respectful for the client, but at the same time, it works as, I guess, a marketing tool. And it's not its primary objective. It's not what I put it in there for, but it is really, really effective because it gives the client instant access to you where they don't have to pay money. And if they do come in and they do feel a connection and they do feel heard, it is likely that they may choose to come back to you again. And I know from just monitoring my own records, over 90% of the clients that come to me for that initial session come back into paid counselling within my private practice. And that's a really good conversion rate if you were looking at sales. So it offers the client that space, I guess, with it's risk-free. There's no payment that is needed. So what do you cover in this initial introductory session? Well, what you don't want to be doing is going and delving deeply into what it is that the client is bringing and kind of rooting around in there. We don't want to open the client up and then, of course, have them leaving with loose ends. We're looking to maybe only superficially find out what it is that the client is looking to bring. But at the same time, it gives you the opportunity to practice your modality. So my modality is person-centered therapy. So I'm able to really be there with the client. And hopefully that client, when they come to see me for that introductory session, will feel that they have been heard. So they feel that connection. They feel empathy within the room, which is the circle of empathy. Yes, we project the empathy, but is it felt by the person that is engaging with us? And when they do feel that, they feel that connection and it begins to build that rapport, begins to build that trust. And at the end of the day, it results in clients coming into your private practice and paying money. So that's maybe something for you to have a think about, maybe speak to your peers about. What are the ethics involved in offering a free session? Keeping in mind that that free introductory session is not a counseling counselling session. It is not a contracted session, although you may discuss your contract and give the client something to take away, maybe your contract, maybe you'll give them a brochure to take away, and we will be covering brochures in my next person-centered business discussion. But it's not a counselling session, so you are not contracted in the same way as you are within a counselling session. It is more an informal discussion, but you have to be mindful that the client will bring some information. And with them bringing information, you would need to, of course, put in some basic verbal contracting in the form of where your limitations in confidentiality are. So that first introductory taster session, if you choose to offer it, does have kind of its own little ecosystem that it works within. I choose to not take an appointment if I have an initial free session with a client. And the reason I do that is I would hate to feel that a client may come in a vulnerable place, have a free session, and then feel obligated into booking sessions with me. I think there would be nothing worse than for me to haul out my diary and say, well, there you go, that's your free session. So when are you next available? Let's get a date in the diary. So what I do is I give the client something to take away, to consider, to process how it was, to sit and chat with me, so that they can really make a decision of whether that feels like a fit for them. I encourage them to maybe speak to other counsellors as well, and explain to them that it is so important that you have that connection and that you feel comfortable. And then I explain to them, should they wish to, after today's session, continuing counselling with me, they're more than welcome to get in touch and make an appointment, and we'll be happy to set that up for them. So they go away. It reduces the obligation when they're coming in, and they go away and they really do have that space and time to choose what fits and feels right for them. And then I guess what's really important is the documentation that they take away with them really clearly outlines what it is that you offer, your pricing structure, and all the information that they may need. Of course, the introductory session also gives the client an opportunity to ask any questions, and I outline that in the email I send them before they come in. They may ask questions about your qualifications, about your modality. They can ask any questions they choose. And of course, again, that is for them to see if that is a fit. So next week, we're going to be speaking about the paperwork that they may take away, and that is includes a brochure. So we're going to be looking at what might make up a basic brochure and how you can make one yourself just with a basic word processing program like MS Word, or on your Mac or on your tablet. So I hope that today has been useful for you.
Well, I always love listening to your segments on person-centered business, and it kind of strikes me also, Ken, that your business side should really reflect your practice side. You know, it should. Running a business should be in the same mindset as running your practice.
Yeah.
And I particularly like the idea that in an initial session, where you're just kind of seeing if you're a good fit for each other, that you don't open the client up and send them away, maybe in a really distressed state, that you manage that initial session, because of course you're not contracted, as you say, and you don't want to kickstart a process. Really, really useful, Ken.
Well, thank you, and I think I agree with you. I echo that, and if you want to see that in evidence, you just look to the research, which is a great segue to our topic today. That's the thing, as being a counselor, a psychotherapist, you don't stop researching, you don't stop learning. And when we think of research, maybe the definition of research is what comes up in your mind when you hear that? Does it mean sitting there with piles of books? It doesn't necessarily mean that. It can be a conversation with a colleague. It can be listening to a podcast. It can be reading through a magazine when you come up with a new idea or some new information. And I know you've looked into this recently, Rory.
I have, and I'm reminded of my teaching days, where a student many years ago said, "Oh, well, if I got a client who was, maybe diverse, I'd be asking them about their diversity. What would it like for them?" And I said, "Okay, so I'm a man. So if I went to see you, would you say, I'm feeling a bit low, a little bit low mood, a little bit down, a bit tearful?" And you said, "So tell me what's it like, Rory, to be a man. Tell me all about being a man." I might think, I'm spending more time teaching my therapist about who I am gender-wise than they are trying to explore what's going on for me. So research can start it's a bit like a wedge. It's a cheese, Ken. It's a cheese.
I like it.
It's like a cheese. So at the base of the cheese, where it's very narrow, we could get a book. We could speak with our supervisor. We could do some research on the internet. So a client presents with something you're not quite sure. And one of the big things that person-centered therapists struggle with is, why do I need to know if it's just about the client's perception? Well, I think that if a client presents with something, and we'll use a reasonably straightforward one like grief, and you don't understand how grief affects human beings, then how the heck do you get in that frame of reference?
Yeah,
100%. How the heck do you do it? And I know everybody's different and grief affects everybody in different ways, but there are themes that run through client presentations with certain presenting issues, and we can't turn our heads away from that. Now, the other thing is that sometimes we genuinely are interested in something a client brings, and you think, I've never found anything in the internet or in books. And my good colleague Catherine Nibbs, who's researched cyber trauma, she pretty much started out that way, and now she's a cyber trauma researcher. She's now defining and ploughing new ground in the area of vicarious trauma. Just started by looking at an area of presentation and thinking there's nothing out there. Now she's doing the research and she's becoming so well known for it. And here's the thing, Ken, if you're going to apply for a job or any kind of work nowadays, first of all, if you work for any kind of charity, that charity is funded, and they want to know that the people they've got in the charity are working for the third sector organisation, which is what charities are called nowadays. They're doing evidence-based practice. They don't want people turning up with all sorts of ideas that have no basis either in reality or in research. So you may very well get asked, if you go for a job, what research have you done?
Yeah.
Now, and then you might want to do a big piece of research like Kath Nibbs has, and that's the thick end of the cheese, where you're kind of seeing people are doing research and qualitative and quantitative. But, research is really important. It informs us as practitioners. And I think it's an ethical duty just to, I read all the time on the internet, talk with colleagues, speak with Ken. Times we just catch up, not making podcasts, and I say to Ken, what do you think about this? And Ken will say, look, I don't know, I'll have a look at it, and we have a bit of a chat through. So that's why research is important.
Yeah, you mentioned there, you said you think that it's an ethical responsibility, and I echo that, and so does the BACP, where they encourage us, and in fact mandate us as an ethical requirement to conduct continuing professional development, which is researching, learning, and staying current with what is going on in our field. I think part of research, for me, well, firstly, let's just rewind back. If you're in the UK and you qualify as a counsellor, you have done a research project. It's part of your learning where you are taught how to research and where to look for the right kind of information. Because what you don't do is research using Wikipedia. You go to authority sites when you're researching. And I know you did a whole pile of work on that in our counselling study resource, Rory, where you've kind of put together a whole pile of really golden nuggets when it comes to research in terms of the links and the quality of those links. Part of research for me is what I call just-in-time learning. So just-in-time learning is about going and researching the topic that maybe comes up in session with a client that you need to know more about. But it's really good if you know where to look. So to have a broad understanding of where you might look to find your research. And I go back to, I worked in a college for a while, and I found pretty quickly that I needed to go and do some continued professional development and research self-harm, because there were incidents of self-harm that were presenting within my sessions, and I needed to understand what that was like. And I was able to go and look at the authority sites and do the research and get the right information back, I guess. And I think that's important. It's about where you research and knowing the authority sites and the places to delve into.
Yeah, and one thing I'm going to miss not being a lecturer anymore is every second year student group I taught did their own research. And I used to love sitting, watching the research presentations, and I just learned so much. I used to say to them, I never knew that. And they'd go, really? And I'd say, well, yes, because I don't know everything. No one knows everything. And I learned so much. We had a really good one last year on PTSD, transgender issues, depression. I mean, just so much new stuff. And here's the thing, Ken. There's new research. There's more research now being done in mental health than I think there ever has been.
Yeah.
I think every time I turn on, go into a professional journal or go into a quality newspaper, there's another piece of research that's being, we live in a developing, growing profession. So important.
It is. It's interesting that you should say that. I was just watching an article on a news thing. I can't think. It's not an article on the news, is it? It wasn't even on the radio. It was on the television. I'm trying to get the right word. Yeah.
That's the one with the moving pictures on.
The one with the moving pictures. And they were speaking about young females within the UK, and the statistic they said is that 25%, 1 in 4 young females in the UK is struggling with some kind of mental health issue. And there's just so much research going into, and the understanding now is so much more, it's so much broader. I'm struggling to find my words this morning, but hopefully you're getting the gist of it there.
Yeah, mental health is becoming a big priority now. Now that a lot of other health issues can be managed, our mental health, it seems to be, over the last few years, seems to be getting to a position where it's getting worse. It seems as not a day goes by certainly in UK newspapers or the media or in professional journals where people aren't evidencing more difficulties, either with specific groups, women, as you just said, or generally different presentation. Anxiety seems to be one that is trending a lot now. If you look at trending keywords on the internet, anxiety is
massive, huge.
Massive.
Huge. And I ask you, Rory, and I ask you listening to this as well, is that because there is a higher emergence of this, or is it because there's more research that is uncovering it, and because it is no longer stigmatized that people are able to talk about it? It's interesting, isn't it? And research is interesting.
It is. You find out all sorts of neat stuff, as I discovered when I was just brushing up again on my actualising tendency. I was looking through the books and like, oh, okay, that's kind of a new idea that I'll have to take away with me. So you should be it should be a joyous experience as a practitioner.
Hopefully listening to today's episode has been an element of research for you. Hopefully something has shaken your interest there. Go take this to your college, your learning institution, your university. Go and speak with your peers, get a debate going, continue this conversation on our Facebook group. You can find us on Facebook very easily by going to Facebook and putting in Counselling Tutor with a 1 at the top, and you just say, hi, here I am, knock on the door, we will let you in. We'd love to have you there. Come and join over 3,000 like-minded learners in our Facebook group from all around the world, and all we talk about is counselling, psychotherapy linked to your study. It's a great place to be and to grow. I've loved today, a really, really interesting kicking off. Talking about that client confidentiality, a lot came out of that one. Of course, your actualising tendency there, Rory, looking at the business side of what we do and that free session and the pros and cons of that. And of course, ending off with research and how important that is to keep us balanced practitioners. I can't wait until next week. There's just so much.
There is, Ken. So as we come to this a podcast, like on Hill Street Brews, I'll say, hey, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.